Well, hello again, my guy. This is so nice. I just love reading with you. So let's get started because there's more adventures happening here. So he's on the pirate boat ship. Sometimes the head pirate, Darius, would tell stories of his own. Stories that Pi was sure were greatly exaggerated. Heroic tales of finding buried treasure and sinking entire fleets. Darius told of winning the pale and homely servant maid in a game of dice with a powerful witch doctor in the South Seas. The witch doctor had put a curse on the girl so that she would always appear the way others told her she looked. That was why she was always referred to as the haggard and homely wench. Pi convinced the captain that he needed a better name, a pirate name. Darius was too plain. He called him Darius the Dreadful to his face, but to the servant girl, the haggard and homely wench, who brought Pi fresh water and fruit, and whose real name was Pauline, he called him Darius the Disagreeable. The two laughed about it. Pi looked at the girl and, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, he told her she had a pretty smile. And suddenly, she did. After a time, Pauline wasn't so haggard and homely after all. In fact, she had turned into a beautiful girl. But always Captain Darius would call her from the deck by her haggard and homely name, and her hair would turn haggard and her face would turn homely. Pauline told Pi of the words the witch doctor had said would break the spell. Let go of your bondage, step out of your chains, no longer be captive, your beauty remains. But to break the spell, the chant had to be spoken by the one who held claim to her. And she knew Darius would rather be thrown into the sea than speak the words that would release her. She said he kept her ugly so that she would be so hideous she would never run off in some port of call. As weeks went by, Pi dropped hints of calm waters filled with fish and sandy beaches sprinkled with gold dust. He pretended to be drunk with ale when he told them of sailing into the north and around the Cape of Fortune, past the Blue Island, and Darius plotted a new course and steadily steered Pi closer to home. Finally, one night, when Pi knew that they were within safe distance of an inhabited island, he told Darius a story of a great and daring sea captain who had learned of a secret treasure buried in a rocky cave. But a sea witch had hexed the treasure with many spells and incantations. Darius pulled a knife from his pocket, demanding that Pi draw a map with the location of the treasure. Pi agreed, but told Darius that without the proper words he would find only a chest of rusted coins and jewels that had turned into dust. Write it down, he said. Pi did as he was told. Darius's eyes glimmered. He raised his glass in a toast, but found it empty. Haggard and homely wench, he called, bring me more rum. And as she poured the liquor into his glass, he read the words from the treasure map. Let go of your bondage, step out of your chains, no longer be captive, your beauty remains. His eyes still on the map, Darius didn't notice Pauline's features turn back to their beautiful state. That same night when Darius and his men slept, Pi assisted Pauline into a side boat and rowed her to the safety of that nearby shore. The perils of the sea were great. The small and rickety sideboat was not a safe means of travel for a young woman, so after leaving her in the care of a kind tavern owner and his wife, with assurances of love and a hasty return, Pye again set off alone. But this time he set a course for home. The journey was short and his heart light. But when he finally reached the shores of his youth, he found that his village had been attacked. There was great destruction, and his people were dead. He walked amid the ruins of the village. Some huts were burned to the ground, while other dwellings remained intact. The hut of his family was still standing, but most of the possessions had either been taken or smashed. In a corner, on the ground, he saw something. A great sadness pierced his heart as he reached to pick up the shell necklace his mother had made for him. She had wanted him to be able to hear the sea lapping on his home shore. She had wanted him to come home, but he'd left it behind. Too late! He remembered the words he had called out to her as he left. When I return. But he had been absent when this great destruction happened, and he had returned too late. He placed the string of shells around his neck and felt their weight, the loss that they now symbolized, his family, his home, and the sound of the sea lapping the shores that he would not return to again. Despite his confusion and grief, he found a small fishing boat and once again took to the sea. But he did not look to the sky for guidance. Many days he sailed without direction, letting the wind steer his course. The moon waxed and waned and waxed again. Eventually, he could see past his tears, and once more he looked into the sky for guidance. To the Great Bear. But he couldn't find her. At first, there were only clouds and darkness, and even when the sky cleared, he found no Great Bear to lead the way. Perhaps his sadness had confused him. It was as if the stars changed places in the sky, and he could no longer distinguish which star was which. There was no longer a crab, a hunter, a fish. There was only a jumble of lights that seemed to flicker and fade. He thought of his mother, remembering the boy he was, standing next to her, cradled in her arms. But now she was gone, and he realized he had yet to earn his name. Pye drifted alone, with no direction, no bearing, no stars to guide him. He disappeared over the southern horizon and was lost. Chapter 14. We glided along in silence for a long time, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The river had a few turns that Early guided me through, and even though we were heading upstream, the current was slow. I took nice, easy strokes, and we settled into our assigned stations, me rowing, him calling out. Sorry, I was checking the time. Let me see. And me rowing, and him calling out an occasional command. It felt good to be the brawn of our duo and let Early set the course. I couldn't begin to guess what was going on in Early's mind, and every once in a while he would lapse into his absent stare. It usually only lasted 10 or 15 seconds, and then he'd be back, always as if nothing had happened. My mind meandered this way and that to Pye and Fisher and Mom and Early, that strangest of boys. And yet here I sat, heading into the wilderness, rowing backward, facing Early. I didn't know for sure that Early really knew where he was going, but I was in for the long haul. After what might have been a few hours, Early took the length of rope from his pack and began making intricate knots. The sun was rising, shedding light on the folly of our trip. It was one thing to set off in the middle of the night. It had seemed more like a dream. But now, as Early worked his knots, I had a knot of my own in my stomach. I rowed harder, trying to keep ahead of the feeling I'd had since the end of Early's last pie story. Early looked up from his knots. "That's sad about Pie's mom, isn't it?" "Yeah," I said, my voice catching in my throat. "You're thinking about your mom, aren't you?" "No," I lied, nearly losing hold of an oar. "Yes, you are." "No, I'm not." "What was she like?" I looked up at Early. I'd never had to describe her before. Everyone I knew also knew my mom. "She was just a normal mom," I answered, not giving Early's question its due. Then I remembered he didn't have a mom. "Well, she was pretty and smart, I guess. She knew how to take off a bandage without pulling off the scab. She didn't mind putting worms on a fishing hook, and she was good with words. Her high school teacher entered one of her poems in a contest. She didn't win, but she said it was nice to be considered." "What happened to her?" "She died, that's all," I said, surprised to hear myself say it. And then I realized not only had I never had to describe my mom, I'd also never had to explain what had happened to her. I hadn't really spoken of her since she died. People had whispered their condolences at the funeral, but I hadn't been required to give a response other than, "Thank you for coming." Early, however, was not a guest at the funeral. "But what happened?" he persisted. "I don't know. All I could do was keep rowing to stay ahead of myself." Early was quiet, but I knew he was waiting for an answer. "We'd been talking down by the creek," I said, leaving out the part about getting lost during the scout campout. "She said she had a headache and was going to bed early. But no one dies of a headache. The doctor said she had a brain aneurysm, that she died in her sleep. I lifted the oars out of the water and let the boat glide. But I wouldn't know, because I wasn't there." I was absent, I thought, recalling the words in Early's pie story. I was absent, and I returned too late. I was supposed to be in charge. I was supposed to take care of my mom, but I wasn't even there. I was sleeping in the barn because it was cool there, and because I was mad. When I went into the house the next morning for breakfast, it was still dark. Her chipped teacup with the little red flowers was hanging on the hook by the sink, and she hadn't touched it. I went to her room, and I found her in her bed. It shouldn't have happened that way. "You're right," Early said. "Those are two different things." "What are?" I asked, surprised that he thought I was right about anything. "Dying and sleeping. A person should be able to do one without the other one sneaking up on him." I tried to imagine those words coming from my mom. I tried recalling her voice, and I realized I couldn't hear her saying it. Her voice was gone. I tried to focus instead on how many strokes of the oars I took and how many times I pumped my legs forward and backward and how many breaths I took. Eventually, I guess I wore myself out with counting and pushing and breathing. And then I noticed Early pulling items out of his backpack. Honey, tobacco, lavender-scented ointment, jelly beans. "What's all that stuff for?" I asked, trying to get my mind off my clenched gut and aching muscles. Fiddle, we're going to have to stop soon, my guy. They're called provisions, things you need on a trip, but you can also call them victuals, necessaries, staples. In the Army, provisions can be called rations, but my favorite is foodstuffs. I know what provisions are, but all that stuff you brought, the honey, tobacco, jelly beans, what's all that for? Tobacco is for ringworm and poison ivy, he said. Taking Bucky from his pocket, he poured a handful of water onto the frog to moisten his skin. And the jelly beans? Well, they're for Bucky, too. He likes jelly beans. Early held one out for the frog, who gave only a half-hearted croak. And the honey and lavender ointment are for snake bites. Okay. Have to stop there. Gosh, the time goes fast. Okay, well, that's it. We'll continue again another day. All right, honey. I love you very much. I'll see you soon. Bye.